Hey guys, welcome back to Pick Up the Truth. Now, yesterday I did a video on the Spanish flu of 1918, and we covered some things about about how the flu originated through the birds and the pigs into the military, and how the military supposedly spread it around from country to country. And I didn't get to fully talk about the other side of the flu, how it affects and how it affected the real people, and the impact it had on our brothers and sisters throughout history. Yesterday, I asked if anybody could leave a comment if they had any family members that were affected by this Spanish flu, and a very dear lady named What Do You Know? She responded and was happy to share information from her life about how her grandfather's cousin, 4-year-old cousin, lost her parents during that time because of the flu. And of course, at that time, her grandfather was a small boy living with his parents and his 4 or 5 other siblings, I'm not sure which. And they had their little cousin, a 4-year-old girl, come live with them and stay with them for a while, because they did that to her parents. And that just shows me that the evidence is real, how they really kill us off, and whenever they see fit, they really and they're so secretive about it. But they still don't care. They're inhumane. They don't care who they take from this earth. But I'm sorry that happened to your family. What do you know? And I'm glad you're here with us to share your experience. And I'm glad they didn't take you away from us, because I can't help but to think how they manipulated your cousin's family. I mean, your grandfather's cousin's family. I mean, they took people away from your family. The children they could have had after that, but the ones who control us see fit to take our lives whenever they want. That's our reward for giving them the power over us that they have. You know, you put your faith into the world they created to enslave you. And we all see the repercussions of putting our faith and belief in this system that controls and enslaves us. They see fit to end our lives whenever they feel. And then they have the nerve to blame it on creation itself. when we know their stories, their lives are bullshit, because we know ourselves. They're flus that they create to infect our people with. They don't come from creation. They come from the periodic tables that they teach us in chemistry of all the chemicals they can combine together to poison the population. They experiment on us whenever they see fit. They try to blame it on the natural earth. They try to blame it on the natural creation on the earth. They blame it on the animals. But the animals aren't dying and suffering from it. They blame it on the soil. But the soil sustains life. You plant a seed in the soil and it brings it to life, so how can it kill? Do we see the sense in their lies if we think about it? Just the same as the air that they claim it comes from. They say it comes from the air, but the air was meant to give every living thing life. You breathe the air in the lungs that were created for you, and it sustains you. But we've given them so much power over the world they enslaved us in. They manipulate the air. They've been manipulating the air for at least 10 years that I know of, even more. We all look above us every day and we look at the lines they make in the sky. They can make those lines with any chemical pollutant they want to kill us off. We wouldn't be the wiser because we don't pay attention. We don't even have the decency to care about our own lives and our own children's lives, what they pollute our air with. We just go about being enslaved in the world that they give us, routinely working like a program puppet that they created us to be. Making us sit in front of the television so they can program us to feel, act, and even have sex the way they want us to do it. They teach us how to do everything. They program us how to do everything. And we listen. We listen. We listen every day, faithfully, because we put our faith and belief in the world that lies to us every step of the way. But we don't care. It gives us pleasure to live in this system. We don't want to lose that pleasure. But will you die for the pleasure that this system gives you? Just so you can be enslaved in it? I don't want to anymore. I went to the store today and I was very disappointed in what I saw. It's the people were totally different. Yesterday I went to the store and it was fine. People were very nice, cordial, respectful. And sure, you know, knowing truth like I do, I know that the majority of the people that I run into every day are programmed by the many ways that they program us with. And I have patience. And I understand that. And I deal with it on a daily basis. But we're talking about two totally different people. Yesterday, the population was respectful and cordial. Today, what I saw in population was people that are instilled with fear and hatred for their fellow brothers and sisters. They're scared of their fellow brothers and sisters, thinking that they might carry some kind of disease that's going to kill them. And they're going to look at you in a different way, and we have to be ready for that as truthers, because we don't see things like they do. We're able to see things with our own minds and our own thoughts and our own feelings, because we're in control of that. But the people we encounter every day are lost in this program, and you can see it. When I was at the convenience store today, I saw three ladies huddled together drinking coffee. And I overheard their conversation, and they were talking about how they were happy because they learned how to correctly use the sanitizer. And that they were talking about the many different ways that people could contract the virus, and how to stay 3 feet away from each other and keep away from the spittle that might accidentally come out of somebody's mouth. And they were also boasting about how they noticed some people didn't care about that, and how they weren't heeding to the warnings and whatnot, and thinking they were better than the people that just didn't pay attention. You're going to see a division in people. The people programmed to believe in this world, and they're the majority, are not going to be on your side if you're a truther and you see things in a different way. You see things in a more truthful way. They see you're not manipulated by. They're going to look at you and see what they used to be. And that may infuriate them. But stay true to yourself. Now, let's get started with the video. I'm sorry I went long-winded, but yeah, I so much appreciate the info. What do you know? And sorry to hear about your loss.
In 1918, I lived in Sequoyah County.
In 1918, my family was living in South Philadelphia.
In 1918, we were living in El Paso, Texas.
I was born and raised in Baltimore.
In bustling cities and remote villages, in the United States and around the world, orphan children cried for their parents in
Now, you can see how many people this flu affected all over the United States and all over the world, including Alaska, where they have freezing temperatures, and this flu somehow manifested through the freezing temperatures to kill over 90% in Alaska. So explain that to me.
1918, people of all cultures struggled with the same terrible threat. and within a matter of months, as many as 50 million would be dead. In the United States, the death toll reached 675,000, 5 times the number of U.S. soldiers killed in World War I. What was that deadly threat?
675,000 of our brothers and sisters. In this country, that was a quarter of our population during that time. The time they controlled us in.
There was many people that died. We had just come from a few years before from Mexico, where we were living, on account of the revolution, the Mexican Revolution. I was about 10 years old. I was the oldest, and my 4 brothers and sisters of the family, only my dad and my sister, my smaller sister, did not get it. My 2 brothers were in one room sick. I was sick in the other bedroom with my mother. My poor dad and sister had to be our attendants and see what they could do for us. Influenza gave you such high fever. Mother told me that I thought her black hair was a cat, and I was afraid of it with the delirium from the high fever. People were left very weak with it, on account of that high fever. And all schools and all public places and every place was closed. I guess nearly 2 or 3 weeks. I was 8 years old. We lived near my dad's mother, and she and her daughter and 2 grandchildren were living close to us. And when they got the flu and got sick, my parents, we just moved in with them to where my mother could nurse all the patients and take care of them. At that time, my mother was 25 years old, and she had 3 children. And she was expecting another baby in May, and this was in February, and she'd taken care of 8 patients at one time, very sick patients with the flu, with no convenience, no modern facilities whatsoever. And Mother had to get the wood to keep heat in the house, to keep all those fires going, plus do the nursing care with 8 patients.
My father's name is Tellus for Reina, but he always went by Tellus Good Morning. Good Morning was his Indian name. At that time, he was working in Tennessee for a DuPont company. Every time anybody was sick, he would always bring up the story about how he got sick while he was in Tennessee and how a lot of people from the village that had gone were brought back sick. They were brought back in a train, he said. Some of them had passed away in Tennessee. In 1918, my mother was like just 11 years old, but she remembers they lived on the south side of the village. She remembers that church bell would ring every day, that there's a certain bell for a notice for the dead. And she said she remembers as a little girl how awful it sounded.
In 1918, as now, most people didn't think of influenza as a disease that could lead to death. We suffer through the flu season every winter. In the U.S., U.S., the flu season usually peaks between January and the end of March.
The symptoms of a cold are usually a runny nose, sometimes low-grade fever, and just feeling a little wiped out. Influenza, on the other hand, is much, much more pronounced than that. People will generally have a high-grade fever, absolutely no energy whatsoever, muscle aches, headaches, a fairly dry cough. With a common cold, you may feel bad for a couple of days, but after 4 to 5 days, you're starting to feel yourself again. With influenza, it's sometimes 2 weeks or more. Really severe, it can go on to cause pneumonia.
Complications from the flu cause an average of more than 200,000 hospitalizations every year in the U.S.
Now we look at those numbers and we know they're coded, Masonically coded. At least we hope. Because what they fail to explain to us is how we have the flu every year. Why we get the flu every year. How does it manifest in us every year? I mean, like clockwork, it just seems to come over us every year. And we look at the animals on the earth, and we look at the plants, and they're not suffering from any of this on a routine basis, or as far as I can tell at all. But these are things we have to look at, the things that don't make sense, and if we think about it in a more truthful light, in a more truthful manner.
And an average 36,000 people die from those complications.
During seasonal influenza epidemics in the United States, there are certain groups that are higher risk for complications. Young children, in particular those less than 2 years of age, elderly people, particularly people 65 years and older, persons of any age who may have certain underlying chronic conditions, for example, asthma, chronic lung disease, chronic cardiovascular disease, and in addition, pregnant women are at higher risk for complications from seasonal influenza.
While seasonal influenza is a serious health threat for people at risk of complications, the outbreak of influenza that swept the nation in 1918 and early 1919 killed over 500,000 people in the U.S. when the population was only a third of what it is today.
I was 4 years old at that time. I was living at the Trujillo Ranch in Members, Baywood, New Mexico. My mother was the midwife, and she tended to the people, delivery of babies and all that kind of thing. She used to take me with her to go and visit the new mothers, and I loved to go see the new babies. And I cried because at that time she didn't want to take me with her because she was tending to the sick and the dying. But the miracle about it is that she didn't get it. And according to her, none of us at home got it either. She would tell me about how people would die, sometimes two in the same bed, and they had no funeral services or anything like that. They would just carry them off to bury them. It was very hard for them to keep up burying the dead because they were dying so fast. The one thing that stayed in my mind, because I used to hear it even later, was the pounding of the nailing of boards together, making, I call them boxes, coffins for the people.
Now look at that, people. The Masonic cross. The one they program us with our whole life. And they have the nerve to put it over our dead body when we're in creation.
Whether people called it influenza, the grip, or the Spanish flu, it was clear this was not the flu that comes every winter. Today, we know that influenza is caused by a virus, the influenza virus. We know that the virus spreads from one person to another through droplets when people cough and sneeze, or through contact with the virus on someone's hand or a contaminated surface. In 1918, no one knew what caused it, where it started, or how to stop it.
They were scared because it happened so rapidly. They didn't know what was going on, what was happening, why.
There were few communities in the U.S. so small or isolated that they were sheltered from the waves of deadly disease that swept around the world. The influenza of 1918 even touched remote Inuit villages in Alaska, sometimes killing every man, woman, and child, or killing the adults and leaving the children with no one to care for them. The 1918 influenza struck some native peoples in the Southwest very hard, too.
I don't think the doctor resided here, but he came from Albuquerque. A lot of our people, older people, didn't speak the English language, so my dad would interpret for him what he was asking them to do, how to take care of themselves. They would work from early morning till late night, trying to visit every home in the pueblo. In the morning, when they got to some of the homes, they would find maybe 2 or 3 people in the family that had passed away during the night. Every day they were burying people. The church bell would be tolling from morning to evening because of so many deaths.
The Bureau of Indian Affairs sent Dr. D.A. Richardson to investigate the situation in the pueblos near Albuquerque, New Mexico. He wrote, "The strength of the pueblos was not taken with the aged or markedly with the infants, but from the young adult life of the tribe." And this was true around the world. With the influenza that hits us every fall and winter, most healthy adults are sick for a week or two and recover. When people die of the flu, it's almost always the very young and the very old. But the influenza of 1918 was not only much more lethal than seasonal flu, the death rate was very high among young adults. Strong young men and women working to support and care for their families.
My parents came to this country from Romania, Bessarabia. In 1918, my family was living in South Philadelphia. I think it was a neighborhood mostly of immigrants. It was a hard life. It was a rough life. My mother and father and my 2 sisters all had the flu. It was a very sad period. There was like a sadness over the city. When you looked out, you saw hardly anybody walking around. People stayed in their houses because they were afraid. And they said that it seems that if it killed you, it did it fast. Because I remember them telling me that a young neighbor, they saw him coming home. They watched from the window, he coming from work. And the next afternoon, they saw him carried out. He died.
Now, we were talking about the so-called normal flu that we get on a routine basis. Now, there's no real evidence that these flus are coming from creation. I see how they're manifesting around the world. But that can always be manipulated by the people who control the world. They can infect anyone they want to on a continuous basis because they work in secret against us. And this would explain why the people saw high death rates in the young, which is totally against what the regular flu would cause. Because what it looks like to me is they amplified their creation of the flu. And they can easily do that because they created it. It looks like they amplified the effects that the flu has on our brothers and sisters. Because if we look at the flu and how it affects us today, it goes through stages. And it takes quite a while could take a week or two to develop pneumonia in a person, because it goes through stages. And for it to turn around and be amplified 100-fold and run its course and cause pneumonia within a 24-hour time span, it's some more time they control us with. Forgive me, guys. It's how I was programmed to believe in time. But you can see how they manipulated the disease that they created. They can use it as a lethal weapon, or they can use it to cause illness. They have the ability because they control this earth. And we're just waking up to this truth.
Of all the cities in the U.S., Philadelphia had one of the highest rates of sickness and death and the most disruption. The city resisted putting measures in place that might have limited the spread of the flu. Measures such as prohibiting public gatherings where the flu could spread easily. The city allowed a large parade to take place to raise money for the troops fighting World War I. Although the marchers and crowd wore gauze masks, many people caught the flu from those who were already infected. Baltimore fared almost as badly as Philadelphia. Soldiers at Camp Meade, south of the city, became sick in mid-September, and by early October, there were 2,000 cases in Baltimore. Officials hesitated to close schools and other meeting places, which would have reduced contact between the sick and the well. Hospitals and funeral homes were overwhelmed, and the workers who kept the city and its businesses running were too sick to get out of bed.
Bethlehem Steel went around and got all these men from down south to operate the mills, and there were just thousands of men coming off from the mills. My father worked for the Bethlehem Steel Company's bakery. The only black baker they ever had was my father, Henry Lindsay. The people were very kind to one another, and it was a place where everybody looked after one another. In the barracks, nobody lived in there but the men who worked for the Bethlehem Steel. Some of them in there died, and the men who were around them didn't even know they were dead. Come home and have the man dead. Don't know how long he'd been dead. Because they went to work. We leave him there in the morning, come back, he's dead in the evening. My mother was sick and everything, and they quarantined us. We didn't visit nobody, and nobody visited us except this lady, this Mrs. Kizzy Thornton. She went round helping everybody who was sick, and I declare that lady never got sick or anything.
Back in 1918, I was between 10 and 12 years old, I would say, and I got the flu, and it was just my mother and I. We were two friends. We went to elementary school together, and both of them were stricken with the flu. And I would go out to then Bayview Hospital to go visit her, and they'd put her out on a porch in the cold winter time, and they had blankets and a hood on, but she died. Both of them died at a young age. People didn't understand, and there was no vaccine, but your parents did the best they could for you.
The influenza of 1918-1919 was a pandemic, an outbreak of disease around the world which caused serious illness and death. Why was the influenza of 1918 so much more deadly than the seasonal flu we experience every winter? What was different about the influenza virus in 1918?
The seasonal influenza viruses that cause annual outbreaks, epidemics in the United States during our fall, winter, and early spring, those are influenza viruses that are circulating among people worldwide. And they are evolving, they're changing just a little bit, but they're human viruses. And so some percentage of the U.S. population and the world's population gets infected every year. Some become ill. Some percent recover from a self-limited illness, and all of these people who survive will have some immunity. Other people get vaccinated, and we receive some immunity through that vaccine. So there are two ways to acquire immune protection. One is through natural infection, in which you recover, you survive, then you have immunity. The other is through vaccination. And vaccination stimulates our body's immune system to produce antibodies.
You see this gentleman speaking to us now? He knows way too much about this virus, this flu. And I know it's his job, his program position. But we have to remember he's in a uniform, and we don't know if he's part of the general population or the people who control us. But my point is, he knows an awful lot about cause and effect of their experiment. They experiment on us all the time. And we have to wake up to it. And we have to come together as a people, try to help each other. I know it's not easy to try to wake people up right now because they're going through, the general population is going through a lot of programming and a lot of brainwashing right now. But we as truthers, we have to keep it together because we can see what's going on. And we can collaborate together to help one another. Well, I love you guys, and as always, I hope the information I put out there helps you. I love you. Take care of yourself.